Hi, I'm Matt from Protite, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to pour Protite epoxy glass coat to get that glossy, durable, clear finish for your projects at home. A good epoxy finish will really highlight the features in the timber, like the knots we have here or the cracks, and provide years of durability. Today we're using Protite epoxy glass coat kit, mixing jugs, mixing stick, and a spreader. Appropriate safety gear, including eyewear, mask, and gloves, orbital sander, butane torch for degassing, measuring tape, Protite cleanup solution to clean up any spills, and a drop sheet to keep the workspace clean. So preparation is really important. A couple of key considerations are working in a dust and lint-free environment. This means if you're sanding, sand in an area where you're not letting it cure. Wipe down the timber with a lint-free cloth. Make sure the timber is really level. The product is a self-leveling product and we don't want it all pooling down one side. I found this really nice piece of wood with some great features. I've used Protite craft resin mixed with a little bit of black pigment to fill in the cracks and highlight the features. So I've overfilled these cracks and then sanded the back with 240 and then finished with a 320 grit sandpaper. Anything higher than that is too smooth and will have trouble adhering the epoxy to the table. I've also taped the underside. That'll reduce epoxy drips and just make it easier to finish. It's really important to measure the timber so you know how much epoxy to use. This piece of timber is 900 by 450, which is just under a half a square metre. So I'll be using 500 mils of resin. It's a 2-to-1 ratio, so that's 333 mils of glass coat resin and 167 mils of the hardener. So let's get into it. The first step is to apply a seal coat. This is really important because it'll stop the bubbles coming up through the resin for that final piece. To do this, we're going to start by putting on protective equipment and then mixing up the epoxy resin and hardener. For the seal coat, I'm using 120 mils total, so 80 mils of resin and 40 mils of hardener. And then we tip that in and hand mix for 3 to 4 minutes. So that's well combined, and now we'll clear our workstation and get ready to pour. So pour it out, and then we'll just spread it around, working into the little crevices, pushing it down the sides there a little bit, and you'll start to see that we've got that really nice, even thin coat. Now, I've got that spread evenly across the table. The next step there is just to brush the epoxy along the sides here. You might notice some little bubbles start to form, but that's okay because we're going to smooth that out with the butane torch. I'm just going to do a few passes about 20 centimetres high. So a couple of passes with the butane torch will guarantee that there's no bubbles in the seal coat. It doesn't matter if a few do come up because we'll just sand them out before we apply the second seal coat. So we've applied the first seal coat and we're going to let that cure overnight. Here's one from yesterday with the seal coat applied with 24 hours to cure. We're now going to sand that back and get it ready for the final flood coat. If you're doing a really professional piece, you can go for 2 or 3 seal coats, but I'm really happy with this one, and so in this case, one's enough. First time you sanded epoxy, it feels like you might have ruined it. You get this really cloudy look, but that's okay. What it's actually doing is creating these little scratches that the flood coat can adhere to. Once you finish sanding, give it a really good wipe down to remove any excess dust. If you've got an air gun, you can use that too. So now we've got a nice clear surface, it's time to mix up the flood coat and get ready to pour. Recapping, I've got about half a square metre piece of timber here, which means 333 mils of glass coat and 167 of hardener. Best way to get a really good mix is to pour part B into part A, give that a really strong mix, and then pour it into a second container and keep mixing. For this amount of material, I'll mix for 6 minutes. So to combine it really well and to get a great mix, we're just going to pour it into the second container and continue mixing. Scraping the sides, scraping the bottom. It's really important to combine part A and part B well. If they're not combined, you can get a soft cure. So we've stirred for 6 minutes and now we're ready to pour the flood coat. So just pour it evenly through the middle of the table. A nice even pour. You'll see we've got a lot more material this time. So we're just going to help that move around the board with our spreader. The great thing about this product is that it's self-leveling, so you see these little ripples, it will level out. Now you'll see there while we use the drop sheet. So we've got a nice thick coat, so it doesn't matter if you've got a few little rises and dips, but we do have some drips. So I'm just going to tidy them up now with the brush. Now just make sanding at the end a little bit easier. And now there might be a couple of little bubbles that start to show, so we're just going to degas for a final time. You've got about 20 minutes to do that. If we degas anytime after about 20 minutes, you'll start to leave marks in the epoxy. So we've degassed and removed all the bubbles. We let that cure for about 24 hours. Just note that it takes about 3 days before you can place items on it, and we're going to be using this for a coffee table, so we'll give it 72 hours. For the perfectionists out there, if you come back tomorrow and you've got some little ripples or bubbles, you can hit it with wet sandpaper 2000, 3000 grit and then buff and polish it out there. But I'm really happy with this finish. It's a high gloss, nice thick coat, really even. So we're just going to mount this to some table legs and it'll be a welcome addition to the lounge room.